Sacramento Kings general manager Monty McNair is heading into the final season on his contract and still no word of any extension coming. It's right to be a little bit concerned about that, but I'll share with you why I am not worried about McNair making a foolish, brash, win now move in order to save his job that could handicap the future of the Sacramento Kings. It's all in today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com, use promo code NBA or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm currently a sports producer and reporter at ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And I spoke with Frankie Cardicelli from Sports 1140 KHTK and the Return of the Roar podcast on yesterday's Locked On Kings podcast. And we talked about a bunch of things, of course, surrounding this draft that's a little over 2 weeks away, with Monty McNair essentially having the 4th overall pick fall into his lap. I've said before that we thought that his trade at last year's deadline, bringing in Domantas Sabonis, trading away Tyrese Haliburton, we thought that that was going to be the main move that determined his future. And in a lot of ways, of course, it still does. I firmly believe that if the Kings don't find a way to re-sign Domantas Sabonis after these 2 years, I don't think it's really realistic to assume that he will sign a new contract with the Kings or sign a contract extension with the Kings and not even test free agency, because he can get far more money in the open market. Him testing free agency, of course, doesn't mean that he wants to leave Sacramento, but McNair has 2 years. The Sacramento Kings have 2 years to put together a good enough product to move in the right direction, to win games enough to convince Sabonis that the money and the future in Sacramento is worth him signing another, probably what would end up being his most lucrative deal of his career. That still very much is on the plate of Monty McNair, and that still very much will determine Monty's success. If the Kings allow Sabonis to walk, if the Kings are not able to re-sign Domantas Sabonis, I don't think Monty McNair has a job at that point here in Sacramento, especially after giving up on, or trading away rather, Tyrese Haliburton, who you had significant contractual control over. That I'm not trying to diminish that. But when the Kings had the 4th pick fall into their lap on draft lottery night, essentially what that Sabonis move became an appetizer. And what the Kings do with this 4th overall pick is the entree. And it's not so much this pick specifically, because it's not like the Kings are looking for their superstar, their guy, the number 1 guy on their roster, like a lot of the other teams are at the top of this draft. The Kings are looking for someone who can be incorporated into this Fox and Sabonis core, who can help this team win to get onto the timeline, that 2-year timeline, right, to get Domantas Sabonis to re-sign. And hopefully the Kings at that point are re-signing Sabonis after 1 or 2 playoff seasons and are looking to build towards a championship. Like, that's the ideal scenario here for Monty McNair and the Sacramento Kings. That is the pathway. That is the building block. And to have a 4 pick fall into your lap, essentially, and we know how much the Kings have gotten draft picks wrong in the past, Monty McNair cannot get this pick wrong. His contract situation, I think, is very indicative of everything, all the significance, all the weight on his shoulders this offseason. Because, yes, it would be far more ideal, and I personally believe that it would be in the best interest of the Sacramento Kings, of course, and Monty McNair, for both sides to come up with a contract extension today. I think it makes a lot more sense. I definitely would be concerned that if McNair is not brought back for any reason after this year, let's say the Kings struggle and fail this year, the Kings are bringing in a new general manager and they have Mike Brown then going into just year 2 of his 4-year deal. Like, there's realistic concerns there. And that's a pattern that the Sacramento Kings have been on really over the last 9-10 seasons since Vivek Ranadive took over as owner. But I'm not overly worried or overly concerned because I recognize the significance of this offseason and I recognize what McNair needs to do and how he needs to deliver right now in order to not just secure his job, not just secure his future, but secure the future of the Kings organization, especially with them having the 4th overall pick now. I would tell you that had the Kings stayed at 7, I would have told you, yeah, the Kings absolutely had to get that pick right too. Don't get me wrong. But the stakes are significantly higher, even if it's just 3 spots above. A lot of Kings fans believe, well, with the number 4 pick, you have to absolutely get a superstar. There have been superstars taken in the past at number 4. Last year's Rookie of the Year, Scotty Barnes, taken number 4 overall. So it's a very valuable position. There are others, kind of more like myself, that would be just fine with the Sacramento Kings drafting a player who maybe doesn't end up being an all-star or a superstar, but is a very good, established NBA starter on a winning basketball team. I'll settle for that. I'm not too greedy, but I understand those who believe that the Kings need to get a superstar with this pick. And these are options, these are decisions, these are concerns that Monty McNair has to weigh this offseason. And in very many ways, like NBA players have to earn their next contract, Monty McNair this offseason has to earn his. There still is a ton of time for the Kings and McNair this offseason to come to an extension, to come to an agreement. And maybe it will wait till after McNair's offseason is complete. Vivek will make that decision. The Kings ownership will make that decision based off of who Monty drafts, who he signs in free agency, and what kind of roster he puts together going into next year. I think it's very possible. It's very feasible. It's not the most common thing to be done in the NBA, but it's also not very common to be on a playoff drought of 16 plus seasons, which the Sacramento Kings are at right now. I'm not concerned truly at this point about McNair not having a contract extension. I'm wary, but I'm not like, okay, the Kings need to get a deal done. I'm even less concerned, though, truthfully, and this speaks to my trust that I have in Monty McNair as a general manager. I'm even less concerned in Monty doing something foolish, risking the future of the organization to an absurd level in order to save his job. Now, I think it makes sense for someone to go, if a general manager is trying to keep their job, if they know that they have to do something, they have to win basketball games, or they're potentially going to be fired and they might not ever get a shot as a general manager ever again, then they need to do something brash. They need to swing for the fences. That's a term that I used a lot for the Sacramento Kings last offseason, right? Make a swing for the fences move. But there's a very big difference between swinging for the fences on a fastball right down the middle or a pitch inside the zone and swinging for the fences with a ball in the dirt. That's a baseball reference for you. Essentially, Monty McNair can still swing for the fences. He can still make a go-for-it move this offseason without going so over the top, taking such a big risk that if it doesn't work out, the Kings are handicapped or they cut the legs out and the knees out from underneath themselves in years going forward, right? So I'm not concerned about McNair. Let's say what we talked about a lot yesterday on yesterday's Locked On Kings. Let's say the Kings are infatuated with Chet Holmgren. Let's say the Kings really like the idea of Chet in Sacramento, think he is the missing piece, but they know they need to move up to number 2 or number 1 in order to get Chet. I don't think it's realistic to be concerned that McNair would be so desperate to get Chet, believing Chet is a savior of his job, that he would be willing to put multiple first-round picks on the line. Certainly not more than 2. Like, I think it would be absurd for McNair to say, okay, we need to move up to number 2 from number 4. Here's the number 4 pick, our 2024 and 2026 unprotected first-rounders. And 2028, sure, let's throw that one in there as well. Like, I think that's, I know Monty is not operating with the belief that he is going to lose his job. Monty McNair is handling Sacramento Kings assets with the belief that he will be managing those assets in 2024, 2026, 2028, and beyond. And believe me, all Sacramento Kings fans should be rooting for that to be the case, because if the Kings have a long-term general manager, one, they haven't had that since Jeff Petrie. And number two, that means that something's probably going right. That at least means that if Monty McNair is making a draft pick selection in 2024, that probably means that Domantas Sabonis is still here. You're going to have to take risk of some sort this offseason, whether it's taking a flyer on a player that maybe is more talented, has a higher ceiling, but doesn't fit. It's also a risk to take a player that's more of a fit, but doesn't necessarily have as high of a ceiling, right? We've talked about this a lot with Jaden Ivey versus Keegan Murray. Talk about a massive risk. How about Shaedon Sharpe? We haven't seen him play basketball in over a year, but he has all this tremendous upside. That's a massive risk that I personally don't think the Kings should take. But my point is, whether you select a player, whether you trade up, whether you trade down, whether you trade out, no matter who you sign in free agency, no matter what contract you're giving, every single decision that the Sacramento Kings make this offseason is going to have an element of risk to it. And that risk is only amplified by the fact that the Kings are really in a win now mode. You know, we've heard these reports, read these reports that there is a win mandate on this season, a playoff mandate on this season. I don't know if that comes from Vivek. I don't know who that comes from. And that makes a lot of sense with McNair's current contract situation. I think it would be a little risky to go into next season, maybe even to get halfway through next season. And let's say the Kings are in the playoff picture, but they haven't secured a playoff spot yet. And that's when you decide whether or not you're going to bring back your general manager. There's definitely risk to that as well. And again, not the most common thing on the planet. I would much rather the Kings go into next season with Monty McNair secured. No one likes to be a lame duck general manager. No one likes to be a lame duck coach. It typically sets yourself up for, if nothing else, a little miscommunication, uncertainty in an organization. If the Kings really have a playoff mandate next year, I'm not mad at it. Are you mad at it? Do you want it to go 17 seasons? Now, I understand if your concern is, well, this playoff mandate means the Sacramento Kings are going to do something brash and do something foolish in order to try and win right now and have a fool's hope of actually making it to the playoffs. I get that. Like maybe you are a huge Jaden Ivey or Shaedon Sharpe fan. Maybe you are the fan of a prospect who's going to take a little more time to develop, but has the potential to turn into a superstar. And therefore you don't like the idea of a Keegan Murray because Murray is more of a safe, older, win now type prospect that might not end up ever being a star in his career. Could end up just being a copy and pasted version, a little bit different version of Harrison Barnes. I mean, I, for one, think the Kings having two Harrison Barneses on their roster would be phenomenal for this team going forward. That's just me personally. But if you think that the Kings are choosing Keegan Murray over someone who they believe has more upside, but because Keegan's window is more right now and that helps the Kings more right now, I get your concern. I think a playoff mandate for this team is good at this point in time. I think this playoff mandate for this team is necessary and was less put into place by ownership and more put into place by what Monty McNair did at the trade deadline. I think as soon as Monty McNair traded Tyrese Halliburton for Domantas Sabonis and acquired Sabonis' contract that now has 2 years left on it, he acquired a basically 2-year playoff mandate. And maybe the Kings have accelerated it to 1 because they don't want this drought to go to 17. Again, I'm okay with that. I'm tired of watching losing basketball. I'm tired of not watching the Kings in some sort of postseason. Because in reality, over half the teams in the NBA, even before the play-in tournament, make some sort of postseason. The Sacramento Kings damn sure better be in one of them in 20 years. But I also stand by the fact that if the Kings do get this decision wrong, if they screw up this draft pick, I don't know if they're ever going to catastrophically screw it up, knock on wood, as much as Vlade Divac did with the Marvin Bagley-Luka Doncic draft in 2018. But I do believe that if the Kings screwed this draft up, if Monty McNair does not hit, I'm not going to say hit a home run, but hit with this number 4 overall draft pick, the Sacramento Kings playoff drought will reach 20. And Domantas Sabonis, in my opinion, will be gone. De'Aaron Fox at that point probably will be gone. Monty McNair for sure will be gone. And who the hell knows where the Kings will be at that point in time. But truly, as of right now, I have enough trust and faith in the ability of Monty McNair that I'm not concerned about him making some kind of ridiculous future handicapping move in order to save his job. I don't think that kind of pressure is on him. And I also, and you know how critical I've been of Vivek Ranadive and ownership involvement, I'm not concerned or overly concerned at this point in time that Sacramento ownership, the Kings ownership, is putting so much pressure on McNair to make a kind of win now move that it could handicap the future of this team. As of right now, I could be wrong. I could be foolish. As of right now, I feel, as someone who covers the team, as someone who's kind of around the team, conversations that I've had, but also my own Sacramento Kings fandom, I believe that the Kings are in capable hands. That doesn't necessarily mean that I believe they're going to deliver, but I do believe they are in capable hands right now in Monty McNair. And I trust that he is not going to make a foolish move in order to save his job, a selfish move in order to save his job. I don't think that should really be in the concern of any Kings fan or in the mind of any Kings fan at this point in time. But of course, once he makes a decision on draft night, once he makes free agency decisions, roster decisions, once we go into training camp, you better believe we can put everything he does under a microscope and dissect it. Because every little thing that Monty McNair and the Kings do this offseason needs to be right. It needs to be right. If this team wants any chance of not just making the playoffs like their mandate says next season, but turning this whole drastically sinking ship. And actually, really, the Kings have been sinking for a long time, well before this. At this point, they might as well be at the bottom of the ocean. If we're going to get some kind of life vests on and come back and surface again, things have to go very, very right. Let me know how you're feeling about Monty McNair and the Kings at this point in time. Are you concerned about him not having a contract extension? Do you feel that he has to earn that contract extension? Are you concerned about some kind of all-in move? Let me know. At MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Another thing that I discussed with Frankie yesterday is the significance, and this ties into what we just talked about, the significance of fit this offseason, the significance of fit in this upcoming draft. Fit versus talent is always a debate in Sacramento, and I understand that the majority of people, at least that I've spoken to, lean on talent more than fit, and they make great points. I'm going to share with you why, for me personally, I think fit is very significant. And I think fit specifically with De'Aaron Fox is very significant. I'll explain more after I tell you about a great sponsor here, the Locked On Kings podcast, the title sponsor of today's Locked On Kings podcast. That is Prize Picks. If you're looking for daily fantasy for the NBA and really all sports, you need to try the award-winning app Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love this app. I know you will too. It's fantasy sports without all that hassle, with all that frustration, without all that pressure, and you can play it at any time of the year. There's no commitment. It's not like a full season of NFL or NBA or MLB fantasy. You can play it really when you want to, which means you can still be playing NBA fantasy right now based off of the NBA finals. Of course, the amount of players that you're picking from that pool is significantly shorter with only 2 teams left. But basically, you pick 2 to 5 players. You pick an over-under on their stats projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projected numbers. Like, you could take Steph Curry over 30.5 points, or Draymond Green over 7.5 rebounds. Jason Tatum under 40.5 points. It would never be that absurd, but you get my point. That's how you do it. You pick over, you pick under. If you get it right, you win money. And they offer so many props. You can think of points, rebounds, steals, all sorts of numbers, all sorts of fun. You can use that basketball knowledge to make yourself some money. And right now, for a limited time, Prize Picks is an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all Locked On Kings users, rather. Hopefully not losers. You can get $50 for free if any player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a single point. That's it. They score a single point. You get $50 for free. You have to use promo code NBA in order to cash in that offer. Play daily fantasy the way it was meant to be played. Have fun and make yourself some money with Prize Picks. Contrary to the belief of some recently, I still have very high hopes for and a high level of belief in De'Aaron Fox. I believe that this De'Aaron Fox Domantas Sabonis core partnership 1 and 2, whoever you want to put it 1, whoever you want to put it 2, does not matter. I believe that partnership with the right supporting cast, with the right either draft pick at number 4 or acquired players with number 4, free agency signings, whatever, I think that can be very successful in the NBA. I still have full faith in De'Aaron Fox and his ability to be a star here in Sacramento. Again, that might be contrary to some popular belief or some of your beliefs based off of things that have happened recently. But I think the fit with De'Aaron Fox in not just this draft pick, but every single move that the Sacramento Kings make this offseason, I think that fit is key. I think that fit is essential. There are a lot of people that I've talked to, certainly a lot of opinions that I've read online, that aren't necessarily concerned with the fit of whoever they select at number 4. Let's use Jaden Ivey, right? The fit of Jaden Ivey with De'Aaron Fox, because they believe that the Kings have chosen De'Aaron Fox over other players in the past, and to this point, it hasn't gone very well. You could say that the Kings chose De'Aaron Fox over Luka Doncic. They were concerned from what we understand, the Kings said, and it was reported, it was thrown out there, that the Kings were concerned about drafting Luka Doncic because they didn't want to take the ball out of De'Aaron Fox's hands. They chose Marvin Bagley. Of course, that didn't work. Then, just recently, the Kings chose to trade Tyrese Halliburton over De'Aaron Fox. I think there's a couple factors to that. Number one is they, yes, do believe Fox can still be their guy and finally got him a front court partner that he's been wanting for his entire career. That's number one. Number two is I also believe Tyrese Halliburton had significantly more trade value. A lot of it to do with his current contract situation. I understand anybody who's like, look, I don't care about fit with De'Aaron Fox. I don't care if the Kings draft Jaden Ivey and he becomes a really good player, but Fox suffers because of it or Fox isn't playing as good because of it. I understand that completely. I think De'Aaron Fox is in a position right now that no matter who the Kings bring in, no matter who the Kings select, he needs to deliver. No matter what. There aren't any excuses. We need to get rid of this slow, consistently slow starts to the season that he's had most, if not every year of his career to this point. That doesn't change by who the Kings draft, who the Kings trade for, who the Kings sign this offseason. Doesn't change one bit. But if the Kings do decide to take a player that does not benefit from playing with Fox and that Fox does not benefit from playing from, what I'm saying is I don't think the Sacramento Kings are going to be any good. And that is what's most important, at least to me. And that's what's most important to the organization at this point in time based off of their playoff mandate. Jaden Ivey could have all the star potential in the world. The reality is, if Jaden Ivey is drafted, he comes here to Sacramento and he struggles to work with De'Aaron Fox, just like Tyrese Halliburton struggled to work with De'Aaron Fox. I know Halliburton and Ivey are very different players. But if that happens, one, the Kings aren't any good. And two, then you have to make a choice again, Fox or Ivey. And I know there will be a lot of fans that say, look, that's strike three. Fox is out at that point. Stick with Ivey, stick with Davion Mitchell, and see what you can get for Fox at that point. I hear that, but also if you're in that situation, if we're playing out this hypothetical scenario, then more than likely, Domantas Sabonis, he's gone too. And who knows what position the Kings are in that point. Of course, Jaden Ivey could give the Kings some security, right? What if Jaden Ivey comes in and he does turn into that John Morant or Donovan Mitchell type star, Donovan Mitchell type talent? Then maybe you're very willing to say bye-bye to De'Aaron Fox because you believe that Ivey can be your guy going forward. This is all future implications. What I'm talking about is right now, current. The Kings need to find someone this offseason, find multiple people really this offseason, but with this number 4 overall pick, they need to find a player, or if they trade the pick away, players that can come in and complement what they're doing right now, which means they need to come in and complement De'Aaron Fox. They need to come in and complement Domantas Sabonis. That is why I love Keegan Murray so much, because I believe Keegan Murray accomplishes that. He fits with Fox. He can play in the pick and roll. He can space the floor. It fits with Domantas Sabonis. He can space the floor, gets out of Sabonis' way, also can do some of the things that Sabonis does, helps with rebounding, probably not as good of a rebounder, of course. There are definitely concerns about who's defending, who's protecting the rim there. I hear that as well. That's why maybe a Chet Holmgren is more appealing to the Kings, because you get that floor spacing and you get that rim protection. Chet Holmgren is another one that I think fits significantly better with the Kings than Jaden Ivey does. I'm not discounting the athleticism, the upside, the excitement, and the potential of Jaden Ivey, or even Shaedon Sharpe. Although I am a million times at this point, I went kind of back and forth with it. Now at this point, I'm a million times more willing for the Kings to draft Ivey than Sharpe. I don't think Sharpe is a good choice or the right risk for the Sacramento Kings to take at this point. That's just me. But Keegan Murray, to me, not only is or has the potential to be a day one starter, a day one contributor that the Sacramento Kings are looking for. Yes, Jaden Ivey does too, but I think Keegan Murray fits almost perfectly across the board, number one. Number two, I don't think Keegan Murray is that much worse or has that much lower of a ceiling. He certainly has a higher floor, but is that much lower of a ceiling guy than Jaden Ivey is. I would bet as of right now that if one of the two of them were to make an all-star team, it would probably be Ivey, because one, he's a guard, and two, the athleticism, the aggressiveness, the flashiness of which he plays at. I admit that. I don't think Keegan Murray being an all-star is out of the realm of possibility by any means. I'm no college basketball expert. I've talked to a lot of college basketball experts who believe that Keegan Murray was one of, if not the best player in college basketball this year. College is different from the NBA, of course, but based off of what we have to go by, Keegan Murray, it was very, very impressive, very good for Iowa, and makes a whole hell of a lot of sense with the Kings. That is where I'm at with this point. I see the importance of fit this year, maybe more than years past. I understand fit has gotten the Kings in trouble in the past, and I trust McNair to either make the right decision, whether it's fit or talent. I trust McNair to make that right decision 100%. But if it were me, fit is more significant to me right now than overall upside is when you're drafting a player who's 19 years old, who is going to need multiple years, more than likely, to reach that tremendous upside. It's just about timelines right now. I am very aware that this might not be the most popular opinion. I'm very aware that you listening right now, you might disagree with me wholeheartedly. Let's talk about it. I'm all for talking about it. That's the fun of this time of the year, right? Send me your thoughts on this at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me mattgeorgesports@gmail.com and keep the conversation going in the comment sections. I've been reading them. I've been trying to respond to some. I like the conversations going on. I understand the argument and debates for both sides. You know where I'm leaning at this point. Where are you at? Again, let's talk about it. Let me also tell you and talk a little bit about another great sponsor of the Locked On Kings podcast. You've heard me talk about them time and time again. I hope, well, it's actually, you can be sick of me talking about Built Bars, but you shouldn't be sick of Built Bars themselves, because they are absolutely delicious. And Built Bars, they have a new Built granola bar for you to try. They are absolutely delicious. There's also a new caramel brownie bar. If you love a good chocolatey brownie with some caramel drizzle on top of it, that is what you taste when you bite into one of these caramel Built Bars that also is loaded with protein and is good for you. Caramel brownie bars are available right now at Built.com. You got to act fast because they're a fan favorite. They go very, very quickly. You can forget about dessert. These are absolutely better than dessert. Plus, they're 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar. I would replace a regular brownie bar with a Built caramel brownie in a heartbeat. It's just my personal opinion. Mint brownie, though, still at my absolute best. Whether you're getting that, a Built granola bar, a Built marshmallow puff, which is protein infused marshmallows. Yeah, that's a real thing. Whatever you get on Built.com, use our promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Been a little while since I've done a solo podcast. Had so many great guests on the last few weeks building up to this NBA draft that's just over 2 weeks away. And don't you worry, I still have more great draft and just Kings-related guests coming in the near future. If there's anybody that you want me to have on Locked On Kings, please let me know. And I look forward to continuing to build up, right? Your opinions are more than allowed to change from now until the draft itself. Maybe you're like me, leaning Keegan Murray right now, but you fall in love with Jaden Ivey or Shaden Sharp or one of the top 3 guys before draft night. That's fine. That's the fun of this year. That's the fun of hosting a podcast at this time of the year. Of course, we would much rather the Sacramento Kings be playing in the NBA Finals right now. But if we're in this situation where the draft matters as much as it does, let's try and enjoy it as much as possible. And I thank you so much for enjoying it with me here on Locked On Kings. I've also been really enjoying watching the amount of reviews coming in on Apple Podcasts for Locked On Kings. That's amazing, because once we get to 350, I will be buying a pair of Sacramento Kings lower bowl opening night tickets, and I will be giving them away to Locked On Kings listeners. So please, if you haven't already, go into Apple Podcasts, make an account really quick. Takes no time at all. Leave a review, hit 5 stars if that's what you think the podcast is worthy of that rating. Be fair, be critical. There's a little box for you to put what you like, what you don't like about the podcast, why I'd encourage others to listen to the podcast. Send those reviews in. It helps us out a lot. Not only does it help me and the podcast get better, it also helps attract new viewers and new listeners to the Locked On Kings podcast. And our numbers this offseason have been tremendous, better than they've ever been before. Thank you so much for that. I don't take that for granted. I want to make sure I repay that love, repay that favor, repay that support and loyalty in many ways with great, excellent draft coverage all the way up until draft night itself and even beyond. This is your hub for Sacramento Kings talk and your Sacramento Kings offseason for a reason. Let's keep it that way. Thank you so much for your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. My name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.